Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Spark. Next in our series, Working with Gesso, is going to be talking about some texture. And I'm actually not working in a book this time. I've taped down these 2 sheets of mixed media paper to the table. And they might turn into collages later. But for right now, I'm just going to treat them like some samples so that I can play with different textures. Part 1, laying the textures down, and then part 2, when they're dry, coming back to tint them and do some different effects with them. So I have a piece of wax paper, just because I didn't have any clear plastic wrap. I have a piece of bubble wrap. I gathered a couple different rubber stamps. The deeper texture ones work better for this. And I took an old key card and cut some teeth into it. I looked for a plastic fork in my kitchen, didn't have one of those either. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And I like just the plain marks you get from the card sometimes. I know that this is probably going to be really hard to see on part 1 of this video because this white on white texture is just really hard for the camera to pick up. But stay tuned and hang in there because you're going to see this all very clearly once we bring in some color media in part 2 to bring out the color. Now, like I've said, I kind of like that as is, but we're going to go in and do different textures to that while it's wet. The first one, I'm not sure if it's going to work. Watercolor artists do this a lot with cling film, plastic wrap, because then it traps water and it creates light and dark spots. So I'm wondering if I can just get kind of crinkle marks. Oh yeah, I can. That I'm sure you can see on camera. Right there. That's something. Yep. Okay. The bubble wrap is probably going to be similar. Works really well if the gesso is thick. But you definitely get that dot pattern. That's pretty self-explanatory. That I just love. Yep, that was not the smartest move. That's okay. You can also, kind of press and wiggle this and get kind of a different move. Now, I'm going to want to clean these stamps really well so that it doesn't clog up the pores of the stamps. But there's some really fun texture already happening on this, and that's it. Like, now it's time for me to just stop and leave this alone. So I'm going to pause here, let this stuff dry, clean this up, and I'll come back and I'll show you in more detail in part 2. So welcome back. This is completely dry. It's actually a day or two later, and I want to go ahead and finish this, take this off my table. Tape is starting to lift up. But I have some really good texture here dried into this gesso. And basically, whatever materials you like to use, you can use on this. So there were 3 things that I pulled out today. I've got watercolors, which I want to just drop a little water in so that they'll be activated and ready when I am. I pulled out some acrylic paint because even though that goes on a lot heavier, you know, you thin it with water, you can have it be as transparent and as translucent as you want. And then I also pulled out these King Art crayons. They are water-soluble crayons. They work the same way as the Crayon d'Ache do, but these crayons are a lot firmer. The texture of them, just the marks that are made, are a lot more precise. These are a lot softer and waxier, and so I think for what I'm going to do, these are going to work better. They're a little more smeary. I really didn't think about a color palette before I started the video. Just going to get water on my finger. If your texture is really 3D, use a brush. So that's going to tear up your finger less. Now this is watercolor. And you can see how perfectly that sinks down into the crevices. It'll take a little bit to dry because the gesso isn't as porous as the paper itself would be. So that worked really well in the spirals there. There wasn't as much texture up here. The nice thing about the gesso drying so slowly is that you can remove some of that water, kind of wipe it back if you want to. I think let's do a little acrylic because this kind of maroony red is there. I want to bring in a little yellow ochre. So just thin down with water. I'm trying to keep that away from my purple. I don't want that to get too muddy. Actually, that's pretty yummy. I really like the watercolor the best, probably because I have a palette that I love so much. This muted purple is called Moon Glow. And this tealy color is Mayan Blue. It goes really nice and olivey together with that yellow ochre. But it does require some patience. You know, there was some nice texture showing up here, and then one brush stroke, and I kind of just obliterated it. So lay some on there, let it dry, ignore it for a while, come back to it later, which is what I'm going to do now. So definitely different ways to bring the texture in the gesso kind of out to play. Again, this is leaving a lot on there to dry, but as I did earlier, you know, you could pick more of it up and have less color and have more white. See, now I want to add more color back into that. Terrible. Now, in this video, I did all over the page, and I can use this as a substrate to build up a collage onto with other elements, with stenciling, with, you know, drawing or painting things in. But remember that you could be doing this kind of texture gesso on top of a page in your journal and then add color just selectively to those areas. So put a pin in that, and I can probably come back and revisit this towards the end of the month when I'm doing a page that's using some of these gesso techniques. But for now, hey, permission to play. It's really satisfying, and it's quick and easy, but I love the texture. This is going to be especially yummy when it dries. So let me clean the paint up off the iPad where I've splattered paint all over my table, and for now, I'll leave this to dry. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, do all those YouTube type things, and I definitely thank you for tuning in and look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of The Weekly Spark. So, goodbye for now.